And then a little bit of, like, Aaron bought a house, so.
Really?
Yes, finally, at 66, I'm an empty nester.
Wow. Who wanted it?
My daughter.
It's so fantastic.
Nobody cares about Cleveland, she also lives in Chicago with her husband.
Oh, okay.
Is how it says that go? I know, are we not even saying it?
I don't know, Victoria.
We're live, everybody. Live streaming. We're live streaming.
No, don't tell me that. Oh, my God.
Live.
Well, hopefully none of my family is here.
Just, so, call everybody in, and I'm gonna grab you in, Arlene, for a second, just to make sure.
He's out there? You see him? Hi, Dad.
Hey, Doug.
Hi, Nori and Aaron.
While we're still here. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, but okay. Looks like there's a gap actually. Oh wow. It's like from Okay, hi everyone, welcome. Even though Alan wants me to start. Alan asked me to start, even though he's the live stream.
Welcome,
Is
whoever.
going, so I think if he is moving away, that means that we confirmed that the live stream is good. So welcome everyone who's joining us via the stream. Welcome everyone who's here in person. We're here today for this final act, kind of the last physical thing that we're doing for Annette, for Arlene and Alan's mom. And I know that the Shiva and the short stream were not at all what we expected, so I hope that this can be a piece of that, give you both comfort. So it's a pleasure to share this and to honor Annette, Smason. And we'll begin with some scriptural readings. So I'll read Psalm 16. Miktam ladavi shomrini el kifasi tivach, amarti ladmayat mayata tova tiva elacham, likdoshim asher ba'artzema va'adirei kol katsivam, ירבו עצמותם אחר, מהרו בלסיך, נזכיהם מדם, ובלסה את שמותם על שפתיים, אדוני מנתחלתי בכוסייתה תמיך גורלי, כלבים נפלו לי גם ימין, אף נחלת שופרה עלי, עורק את אדוני אשר יעשני, אף לילות יסרוני כליותיי, שיביתי המלך תמיד ממני, ולאמרות לכן שמח ליבי ויגל כבודי, אף בשרי ישכון לבטח, כי לא תעזוב נפשי לשאול לא תיתן חסידך, לראות שחט תודיעני, אורח חיים שובע שמחות את פניך נעימות בנימך נצח. I'll recite from Proverbs the Eshet Chayil, and then we'll invite Arlene to speak some words about her mother. Eshet Chayil mi imsa v'rachamini mi yifra, v'achakbach v'bala, v'shalala v'yaksar, gamla tuto v'lora kol yemei chayeha, Darshat Zener v'vishtim v'tas kepetz kabeha, haytaka an yotzoker mimerchakta v'lachma, v'takem ba'od laila v'titenter v'beita, v'choken darotea, Zamama, Sadeh Tikafei, Holomi Prikafe, Natar Karem, Kograva Osmatnea, Vitametzroteha, Va'amaki Tot Safra, Ikbebel Elanera, Yadeh Shilchamaki Shor, V'kavdena Tamkufaleh, Kafa Parsaleani, Yadeh Shilchalevion, Lotir Leveta Mishale, Kigoveta Labushanim, Marvadi Astala, Shishar Manabusha, Noda Basharim Bala Vishipto, Yuzite Aretz, Adin Astan, Kimkor, Vahagor Navna, Lakarani, also Hadar Levusha, Tisapio, Makaron, Diapat, Lavavot, Madhur, Kesel Alishana, Sophia Alifot Beta, Lakam Aslutot Hotel, Amana Shua, Valala, Rodvan Asukayu, Alid Alkulana, Sheker Hachein, Behela Yopi, Ishayrat Adonai, Tit Alal. Tinula mi priyadeh, vihalula, vasharim vaseha. Now I invite Arlene to share some words before we move to the study.
Well, I thought we were going to have to, but that's okay. Take this off. 27 years ago, I was standing at the cemetery. I was closer over there, and reflected on my father's life. I described him as a diamond in the rough. He was quite complex. His outside exterior had a protective shell. Someone meeting him for the first time would only see a brash, highly excitable, and unfiltered individual. However, once you broke through that exterior and polished that remaining core, a beautiful and precious gem emerged in its purest form. That describes my daddy, or Gunya, as we refer to him. Today, I am trying to describe my mother on paper. She was one tough cookie. She would say, what you see is what you get. She was just as unique as mine and just as loud as my father. Frankly, they were quite the dynamic duo. Understanding my mother as her daughter was difficult. We shared an unusual journey. Many times we traveled a path that was choppy and chaotic, but as we neared the end of our voyage together, we found a beautiful rhythm. She was with me when I took my first breath, and I was with her when she took her last one. Yes, the circle of life. As a daughter and then a mother of two daughters, I have a unique understanding of the bonds between mothers and daughters. It's rock solid, unyielding, but always quite complex. In Judaism, the term lador v'dor, from generation to generation, comes to mind. Mothers of daughters are daughters of mothers. A circle is completed from one generation to the next. My mother was never that touchy-feely mother. She didn't bake cookies or pick me up after school. But she was my mother, and she did her best. And frankly, that's all you can ask of a parent. When I think of Annette, I can't help but smile. She lived 89 years, but she had a great 87 years. She had a zest for life. She did everything by the book, and her book was full of rules and witticisms, all created by Annette. She was a natural product of New Orleans. She always marched to her own beat. She loved music. As a young child, she pestered her family until they bought her a trumpet. That instrument was her pride and joy. Her interest in music was a lifelong passion, and she loved all forms: Dixieland, jazz, musical theater, and even Italian operas. She always loved to party, and sometimes it was to excess. She loved New Orleans restaurants, which included the food and her numerous waiters. Of course, she also enjoyed her cutting saw, and I'm not referring to the chef. Another of her loves was Mardi Gras, especially the crew of Venus. She joined the organization in the late 1950s until it stopped parading in the late 90s. Although she rose to the highest position, right as an officer, right below the captain, her highlight when she was the queen in 1976. I remember her observing the crowns in a small room. She took the king's crown, and we started walking away, and somebody ran after her and started explaining, "No, you can't. The larger crown, you can't take that. That's for the king." And she gave that poor man the look. No one was telling my mother she couldn't have that crown. She merely said to him, "It's mine now." She was the queen, and therefore the title was more important than a king. She deserved that larger crown. That was Annette. She loved to travel, but Mardi Gras could never be missed. She started her travels as a young child with her grandfather. She continued her trips with my father, and they had traveled to all 7 continents before his death. When she was in her early 80s, I got the incredible privilege to travel with her. I will cherish those memories. Her last cruise was in 2019. We traveled through Venice, Rome, and London. She loved cruising and wearing her beaded tops, sitting at the captain's table on crystal cruises, eating caviar, and having a front row seat to watch the nightly entertainment, and of course, play bingo. There is a great quote that states, "I am a princess, not because I married a prince, but because my mother happens to be a queen." I was quite blessed to be her queen.
Thank you. So we'll now move to the stone where Alan will speak,
Right.
and then I'll read the inscriptions that come up.
And we need to remind everybody there may be a dropout of signal for those of you as we move the car and we move our signal for internet so we can get closer to the gravesite. So just bear with us and we can move on. So you've already heard from my sister about what it means to be a matriarch, my mother. My mother, however, was not the original matriarch of our family. The Smiths had a lot to owe to the Breens and the fortuitous marriage of my maternal grandmother, Rosa Breen Smith. She was one of the original members of the first class at Loyola University in 1912 and graduated as a pharmacist in 1916. She has her final resting place at the far end of these family plots. Back then, women pharmacists were a rarity. If you recall, they were not even allowed to vote yet. They had to wait another 4 years until they were granted that right. And no male pharmacist in Louisiana would allow her to serve out her residency as required by the state's laws. So she traveled to the progressive state of Mississippi, where she served out her residency and then moved back to Louisiana. When she met and married my grandfather, David Smith, who rests next to her, he was an accountant for the Times-Picayune. Rose didn't think that was good enough. She had him become a druggist on his own, and the Smith's drugstore was founded in the 1100 block of St. Charles next to the massive Jerusalem Temple Shrine. My great-grandfather, Ellis Smith, his wife, Sarah Bukowski Smith, my grandparents, great-grandparents, and my Uncle Irvin all lived on top of that drugstore. At the time when my mother was born at Touro Infirmary in 1932, there was no Pontchartrain Expressway. She grew up in the drugstore and counted several neighborhood friends, among them the Chinese family who ran the laundry around the corner, the Lees. My mother was friendly with their son, Harry, who later went on to become a politician, tax collector, and well-known sheriff in Jefferson Parish. By most accounts, my mom was a pepper pot, a rascal who could get her way most of the time. Her older brother was 10 years older than her, so he didn't have a lot of doing with her upbringing. Her favorite spot was apparently at the pinball machine at the drugstore, where she pumped nickels into the slots and whiled away the hours. Sometimes, as a youngster, we knew she became enamored of music. Perhaps she had picked up dexterity at the pinball machine and could manipulate the keys on her trumpet so well, but she became a top player at McMain High School and actually went to Forte High School to play with their band. Back then, of course, the girls and the boys were not co-ed. By then, her mother and father had their own twin drugstores. Rose had bought the historic drugstore at Jackson, Britannia, only a couple of blocks away from the new site in the 2000 block of St. Charles, where Smith's drugstore was relocated due to the state of Louisiana appropriating their earlier building as an easement for the Pontchartrain Expressway. Attorneys out there, the right of eminent domain, you all know what that is. That meant that the state was able to buy the ground of the store and their residents for pennies on the dollar. But David Smith, who did not pay off the surveyor for the state, learned his lesson. He bought the location next to the Pontchartrain Hotel for his drugstore, and along with it, a small residence with a separate retail front that he first made into a card and gift shop. Annette was a talented trumpet player. She went from playing at McMain, eventually to LSU, where she decided against being in the heralded band after having to march through what the animals left behind on the streets and in the fields. She was a member of the Purple Jackets pickup band instead, and she learned her classical music like few others. When Irvin and David added radios and record players to the card and gift shop, it was only natural for records to be added to their offerings. By then, Annette had met and married my father, and they had moved to the third floor above Rose's drugstore. My mom decided to add classical music to the store's inventory, and soon the radios, cards, and appliances went out, and 45s and LPs came in. David and Rose bought a new home on Broadway, and Irvin and his wife Sarah moved onto the second floor. David bought a house a block away on Broadway, and the Smasons moved there. All the while, Smith's record shop blossomed as a business, and they became, quote, the store that brought low record prices to New Orleans, end quote. Irvin dabbled in the recording industry for a bit, and after a few major hits, he moved his family to his new home on Willow Street. Rose informed David she had bought a new home close to Hevertillum so she could walk to synagogue. Sometime when they moved, Annette took over the big house on Broadway before her father knew it, and she stayed there for the rest of her life. Eventually, she got her father's portion of the record shop business too, which was part of the partnership between David, his brother and druggist Isidore, and Irvin. Annette had made the record shop a success through her business acumen and her knowledge of classical and opera. And as the store increased in size and scope, my mother decided to stock the items by record labels and to use the Schwann catalog to help find classical and opera recordings. It was one of the most unusual ways to inventory a store. There was one sleeved record bearing the record label and title of the recording typed on it and scotch taped onto it, and those were on the floor, and all extra items in the rear or underneath the display bins. Pulling sleeves and replacing them on the floor with new records was my job. My mother and father also became partners with Irvin and S&S Productions as musical promoters. They brought down some of the biggest names in show business, starting with Maurice Chevalier, Peter, Paul, and Mary, The Hootenanny Show with Jack Linkletter, Simon and Garfunkel, Dionne Warwick, The Supremes, Donovan, the Dave Brubeck Quartet, Miles Davis, Carlos Montoya, Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass, Julius Wechter and the Baja Marimba Band, Glenn Campbell, O.C. Smith, Procol Harum, Vanilla Fudge, Sly and the Family Stone, the Moody Blues, and Johnny Rivers, Nancy Wilson, and Johnny Mathis 3 times each, just to name a few. Now, all of this truly earned my mother the moniker Musical Maven. Another of my mother's great loves was carnival. She loved participating in Mardi Gras, as Arlene said, as a rider in the Crew of Venus, the first parading ladies organization. After being a lieutenant on one of the floats, she became an officer, rode as the senior officer in a limousine until the crew disbanded in 1992. But she missed the thrill of riding so much that she created a women's subcrew in the Crew of Okeanos a few years later, naming it after the former crew founded by pharmacists, the Crew of Anubis. She truly loved the pageantry of carnival and was quick to nominate me as a replacement narrator, a job I have held with one or more crews for more than 45 years. Nothing made her more happy than to sit on the floor watching a ball tableau while dressed to the nines. Whether throwing one of her birthday affairs or dining out nightly, my mother enjoyed her life, never, ever eating leftovers, and always availing herself of an opportunity to celebrate, oftentimes with her signature Cuddy song. She knew how to have a good time, an expression of which is to make merry. Finally, while my father was alive, the two of them traveled all over the world to Africa, the subcontinent of India, People's Republic of China, Southeast Asia, and across the European and South American continents. They also managed to visit Australia, New Zealand, and Antarctica. They cruised aboard the Queen Elizabeth and other Cunard liners before becoming Crystal Cruise Line enthusiasts. My mother's love of traveling was not just expressed in the 134 cruises, right, Arlene? 137, corrected. But also in the several trips she took aboard the Concorde. Until the Luxor shooting, she even visited Eretz Mitzrayim almost on a yearly basis. The finals tribute for our mother today is therefore as a mariner, a term she would proudly claim. And we will now remove the covering and reveal the full inscription. Rabbi Phil Kaplan will read and translate the Hebrew, leaving the final portion in English for Arlene and I to read. I'll do it. I'll go over here.
Rabbi, my father was not.
Yeah. Come on the back.
Yeah.
And let me move. Move that a little bit. Just gotta do that a little bit.
The stone rings Kana Gola Bat David, Yud Gimel Tishrei, in the year 5782. So Kana Golda, daughter of David, was passed away on the 13th of Tishrei in the year 5782.
Beloved mother.
Oh, beloved.
What? Beloved mother and Bubby, musical maven and merry mariner.
And I was at the Kilmale.
Yes.
Do we have them in here?
No. Well, no, not here.
Okay. Now recite the memorial prayer. El malei rachamim shochein bamramim hametzein ocham nechon al kanfei hashechina v'malat kedoshim otarim kezohar harakia masirim et nishmat Hana Golda Bat David shehalcha le'olama ba'avor she'anachnu mitpalelim ba'ad Haskarat Nishmata Vegan Eden Day ויצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום המשכבה, ונאמר Amen.
There's not a minion.
Oh, Harold just said this.
Is there a minion? There are 10? But not all Jewish.
Okay. So the reception to follow will be at Kosher Cajun
Right.
immediately
Right.
after. That's everyone is invited.
All right. If we get a minion at Kosher Cajun, maybe we'll do it there. Thank you very much for everybody for being with us. And again, I know a lot of the grandkids couldn't join us. And again, thank you for being here. Hopefully the live stream worked, and those that weren't able to be here were able to be here in spirit.
Would you like to say if you don't invite? It's okay. Whatever you decide.
Okay.
If you want me to say the El Mali for your father.
That's fine if you want, or for David and Rose too. It's no problem.
If you want me to.
Fine. Go right ahead.
El Mali Rachamim Shofem Damramim Hamasei Menucha Nefon Al Kanfei Hashchina B'Valot Kedoshim Te'arim Kezor Al Akiyam Asirim Et Nishmat Aryeh Lev Ben Shmuel She'alach Le'olamo Ba'avor She'anach Nifalin Ba'ad Hazkarat Nishmato Began Eden Tei Menuchato Lachen Ba'al Rachamim Yasirehu V'Sefer Knafav Le'olamim V'Yitzror B'Yitzror HaChayim Et Nishmato אדוני נחלתו וינוח בשלום המשכבו ונאמר אמן.
Okay, let's go break bread.
Stones to put on.
Anybody want any water? We have water. There's some water if you need water.
I'll see you at. Here, Airline, your speeches.
Thank you. Anybody want water? Thank you.
Very nice family history.
We lived a lot of memories.
Sorry David wasn't here. And Nori and Aaron too. Yay!
Still recording?
I don't know if he's still watching. You want a water?
Thank you.
Bill?